Good evening. Thank you everybody so much for joining me this evening. I'm Wayne, and I'm super excited to share just a little bit about my research project, fellowship, and travel experiences exploring unearthed urbanisms. This project, from its beginning, was always about space and culture. So, as designers, we often observe and analyze space as pragmatic. We think about scale, proportion, texture, materiality, even costs from time to time. But culture is similar in a lot of ways. It's a little bit more than just a coffee shop vibe. We experience culture through food, music and dance, art, collective memory, and the stories that we tell. And so this project, from just about a year ago, sitting down to write the first draft of the proposal, to exactly a year ago today, receiving the email that changed everything, was about exploring how the African diaspora has left its mark on space and culture in South and Central America. So, for a little bit of context, the colonial slave trade had massive repercussions on the Western Hemisphere. An estimated 12 million Africans were captured and shipped across the Atlantic, with an estimated 10.7 million arriving to the Americas. Around 400,000 landed in what we now know as the United States, but in Brazil alone, the number is 12 times that, at almost 5 million people. And so this project aimed to explore the impact of the diaspora across the hemisphere, and started to explore the spaces and stories that have left their mark. Architectural designer and professor Leslie Loco once said that culture is the sum of the stories that we tell to ourselves about ourselves, and that historically architecture has spoken in a singular voice. And so this project aimed to echo the statements that she had made and start to expand the story and the narrative and of architecture and its legacy. And so, like I said earlier, I got the privilege to explore and study African diaspora culture and spaces in 10 cities across Brazil, Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica. And as much as I'd want to tell you guys about every site that I got to visit, I don't want to keep you here till next Thursday. So I thought that I would select a handful of sites from 5 of these cities to start to share a glimpse of the Black spatial story in Latin America. As I started to engage with these spatial and cultural bodies, I wanted a more intuitive way to navigate and traverse these spaces. So I started to imagine space and culture as mapped onto the human body itself. That way I could navigate these cities beyond just a series of lines and grids on a map or a set of rectangles on a site plan, but start to study from a more embodied experience. And so I started to imagine museums and archives as the brain of cities, acting to preserve or forget collective memory. Churches and temples became the intangible soul, spaces of Black spirituality and religion. Plazas and auditoriums became the hands and feet, reverberating culture through music and dance. Galleries and exhibitions became the heart, pulsating culture from the inside out. And markets and restaurants acting as the stomach, nourishing the cultural body. And so I also engaged in a range of research methodologies to ensure that the stories that were being told as comprehensively as possible. So I underwent documenting sites through photography, hand sketching, and video. I also accessed local archives and libraries to ensure to read journals and books that aren't available on the internet. And I also engaged in conversations with locals, which involved for me learning a brand new language, Brazilian Portuguese, about 2.5 months before heading to Brazil, which is the first stop on my trip. We're starting today in Rio de Janeiro, which translates quite literally to the January River in English. Who here has heard of Copacabana or Ipanema? Yeah, it's a global tourist icon, but sites that are a little bit less known include the neighborhood of Pequena Africa, or Little Africa. So this project has been about excavating and expanding on stories that were previously untold, and Rio became the exemplar, quite literally, of unearthing these spaces. So during the 18th and 19th centuries, Rio underwent massive urban renewal initiatives, utilizing a technique called embankment, literally infilling using garbage or organic material to expand the built area that was available to build. And so this tool was used for urban expansion, but it was also a tool used to erase and displace black populations. And so Rio became a site to start to understand how a city reckons with its past and navigate the difference between past conditions, past legacy, and present conditions. And so we'll start today at the Cais de Valongo, which is the Valongo Wharf. It was the largest port of enslaved Africans in the world. An estimated 900,000 to 1 million people arrived to this port alone. So from that 10.7 million number from before, almost 1 in 10 people arrived just here. And so this was an extremely heavy site to navigate. You can see where the grass is actually where the water used to arrive in the city. And so this is where boats were embarked. And so you can see the level grade change from what used to be ground zero for the city and current conditions today. That embankment was a tool to quite physically erase this spot from the map. The Portuguese had engaged in slave trade beyond what was beyond the after it was officially abolished, and so they wanted to cover their tracks, and so that was a tool that was used to erase the story from the city's history. You can see you enter the site from the set of stairs here, and you descend down into experiencing the weight of the space and its legacy. And so you can start to get a sense of the urban conditions surrounding it, and then the embanked wharf below. This plaque sits at the base of the site, which shows at the base there where the boats would embark, and the enslaved Africans would cross the plaza to slave depots to later be sold. And so this site is a really critical site for understanding the Black story in Brazil and in Rio specifically. Across the plaza now stands an exhibition that commemorates those who were enslaved. And this building you saw earlier in the little snippet was the first building in Rio built without slave labor. And it was designed and contributed by Black engineer André Rebouças. And so they're currently in talks now to convert this warehouse into a museum commemorating the wharf and exhibit artifacts that were found on the site when it was first discovered. Another site that deals with collective memory as well as present conditions is Pedra do Sal, or Salt Stone. This was another place where the enslaved were sold alongside salt, which was a major economic driver in colonial Brazil. After slavery was abolished in 1888, African percussion and cultural expression was criminalized. And so this site became a space for collective healing and commemoration after that practice was decriminalized in the 20th century. Black people gathered here to form the foundations of what is now known as samba. And so the site showcases street art with Afro-Brazilian cultural elements and highlights community icons such as Tia Ciata and Eito Prazeres, who helped form foundations for what the community is now known as today. And so during the day, it's mostly empty. A few visitors pass by, but at night is when it starts to come to life, with live samba playing in the center and people gathering to sing and dance and just celebrate. And so this space, again, is an example of the dichotomy between past legacy and present conditions. Moving north to northeast Brazil in Salvador, which is considered the most African city outside of the continent itself, with an 80% estimated Afro-descendant population. It's a rich site. It's a rich city that preserves a lot of Afro-Brazilian heritage and tradition, including the soul or spiritual practices. And so this church is Nossa Senhora do Rosário dos Homens Pretos, or the Church of the Rosary of the Black Men. It was built by an Irmandade, or brotherhood, of enslaved and free Africans who were prohibited from worshiping in the same churches as the Portuguese, so they had to create their own spaces of worship. This church took over 100 years to build and is an example of that Black spatial resilience and spiritual continuity. As you enter, you start to notice the neoclassical ornamentation and gold ornamentation along the walls. And this space preserves Black spiritual continuity through African masses that are held on Sunday and Tuesday evenings. And so you get to witnessing and experiencing that Black spiritual continuity, hearing the percussions, and seeing the continuity of that brotherhood into the present day was really special experience. Not only was the Catholic faith preserved, but African religious spiritual practices were also maintained as well. This is the Casa de Yemanja, or Yemanja house, dedicated to the Orisha, or deity of the sea. This is a temple of the Afro-syncretic religion of Candomblé. And so African religions found a way to mix their practices with Catholic saints in order to escape persecution. And so this space also serves as a fish market, again, where fishermen catch and create offerings for the deity. And so this space kind of acts as a Black spiritual hub right along the coast. And so the architecture remains humble, keeping low to the ground and staying close to the water as it becomes a backdrop and dissolves to make space for religious ceremonies and services. And so it's a great example of the harmony between the Candomblé faith, harmonizing people with the environment, and the ocean, which harkens back to the Atlantic and that legacy. Yeah, this was really special. I got to arrive just in time to watch a ceremony myself. So just a really, again, embodied experience, hearing the drum beats, hearing the Yoruba traditional chants, and seeing how the space started to envelop itself with its context. Moving north now to Colombia, Cali del Valle, or simply known as Cali, compared to Rio's House of Samba, is the world capital of salsa. And so in a similar way, the genre has very, very strong roots to the African diaspora. And so there's a space that starts to celebrate some of that musical legacy. This is the Plazoleta Grupo Miche. It commemorates a popular salsa band based in Cali during the 80s and 90s. It starts to become an interactive exhibit for visitors to engage with the group's musical legacy. And so the trumpets start to spell out the word Miche, which is Colombian slang for black. And so the trumpets that reach down to the ground become semi-intimate niches where music plays 24/7 in the plaza. And so people can come and interact with the music. And once you dug down into the space, you can read more about the group's history and its musical connection to the African diaspora. And so there's a very interesting space to understand how that musical legacy and celebration can be integrated with a more interactive plaza space. Just behind the monument stands the Museo Jairo Varela, which is a museum which commemorates the group's founder, Jairo Varela, who was born in Quibdó, another of the stops on my trip. But the space showcases artifacts and tells the story of his life and the impact that the group left on the city of Cali and the country as well. And so this space again kind of shows that musical legacy and its connection to its place and identity. The museum also plays music 24/7, so it's kind of like a day and night celebration of the group's history. Moving north to Ciudad de Panama, Panama City, compared to the other cities, this country's waves of Black immigration also include Caribbean migration. So there's very strong presence of Caribbean heritage and legacy in this city. This is the Museo Afro-Antillano, or the Afro-Antillean Museum, which was a former Methodist Christian church, again kind of showing that Black spiritual legacy that has been converted into a museum, showcasing artifacts and telling the stories of how Afro-Panamanians have left and impacted the larger, broader Panamanian culture. And so the interior hosts artifacts and is a simple structure, again, wooden vernacular raised on stilts, but it starts to harken back to some of those cultural contributions. The more interesting cultural contribution is the one that is arguably the most significant to our day-to-day, which is the construction of the Panama Canal. It changed global economics as we know it, and a large portion of its construction was due to Caribbean labor. And so before it was constructed, there was a 5-mile stretch on each side of the canal called the Canal Zone. It was administrated by the U.S. government, and so a lot of Jim Crow era segregation practices were transmuted into the Canal Zone era. Gold and silver towns and roles were assigned to American immigrant workers and Caribbean immigrant workers. So discrepancies in labor practices, pay, and living conditions were common. However, Black Caribbean immigrants found ways to preserve their cultural practices and spatial heritage, bringing more of that wooden vernacular architecture to those towns and creating space for themselves even despite their conditions. And so moving from the archive to the lived experience and getting to see the Panama Canal itself was really significant to understand just the scale and the scope of those contributions and the massive amounts of labor that it took to create an economic, a revolutionary economic driver for the world. I thought this was interesting. There's a small stone when you reach the visitor center that starts to commemorate the workers of the canal. And so again, kind of tying in some of that spatial commemoration and understanding how to honor what has come before, even in small ways. And the last stop on my trip, and where we'll end our journey this evening, is the place where this project was born. My family has roots in Limón, Costa Rica, which is a small town on the Caribbean coast. My grandmother would tell us stories of how things were and how they are now. And so this place was the seed that grew into the tree that became this project. Caribbean workers, the majority from Jamaica, immigrated to help construct a railroad from the coast to the Central Valley. And many of them stayed and formed what is now known as Jamaica Town in the city center. And so, although a lot of that cultural legacy has been preserved, much of it is unfortunately not here today. For example, the very infrastructure that was developed has stopped receiving government funding during the 20th century, and so a lot of the railroads and train depots have been left in a state of disarray. Another site that was very significant to Black life in Limón was the Black Star Line, which was another wood vernacular building that acted as a social and community hub in the town. It was rebuilt once during the late 20th century, but burned down in the 1990s, and since hasn't been rebuilt. And so the lot that stands today is kind of an echo or a ghost of the culture that once stood, that is not as strong. And so this is its present condition. Similarly, the First Baptist Church in Limón, again, kind of tying in some of that spiritual legacy, is in a similar state. Although it's considered and designated as a cultural heritage site in the country, the lack of funding has left it in a state that is less than ideal. However, not all of the town is doom and gloom. The Methodist Church that stands in the downtown area is still well preserved, with a A-frame wooden architecture and large lights that continue to carry forward that spiritual and spatial legacy. And so exploring these sites, studying these spaces, learning about these stories was the experience of a lifetime. Getting to engage with so many facets of the African diaspora through an embodied spatial and cultural experience was one that changed my perspective of the way that I view cities. No longer just plans on a grid or a site map, but a living, breathing cultural body that has stories that are embedded in the spaces that are and are no longer. Just being able to sit with the presence of the spatial legacy and take time to observe, look at the surroundings, and take in the scene, the history, the moment was very special. And so I wanted to take a special moment to thank the sponsors of the fellowship, Linda and Turandura, who were so generous to make this opportunity possible. I want to thank Ruth, Kirsten, and the team at Blackprint for providing the opportunity to for providing the opportunity to share some of my findings here with you all this evening. I want to thank the librarians and guests and church elders and cooks that became my new friends and told the stories that helped inform my research. So I want to thank them as well. And last but not least, to the women whose life and stories shaped what this project became and inspired me to start this project. My grandmother, I couldn't have done it without her, so huge thanks to her. Shout out. If you'd like to continue on, on my journey as I continue to document these spaces, you can scan the link here. There's a short video in the first of a series that I'm producing about some of the cities and their stories, as well as a series of essays on deeper dives related to specific sites within each city. So if you'd like to check that out, that's available for you. And to conclude, in every language that I got to embody on this journey, muito obrigado, muchísimas gracias, and thank you so much.